to welcome you to another webinar in the Energy is Everywhere series that HUD, the Department of Energy, and the Department of Education bring to you each month. Today we'll be talking about a curriculum that you can use with your residents that will help them stay cool and save energy over the summer. The curriculum was developed by the Stewards of Affordable Housing for the Future, and we have Maddie Salzman from the Department of Energy who will walk us through this. I want to mention that there will be time for Q&A at the end of the webinar, so hang tight for that. But before we start, I'd like to give a proper introduction of Maddie. She works in the U.S. Department of Energy's Office of Energy Efficiency and Renewable Energy, which is focused on residential energy efficiency projects, which is why she's so good for this particular webinar. Prior to working for DOE, she worked on home energy use with various organizations in Missouri, Arkansas, and rural India. She recently received a master's degree of public service from the Clinton School of Public Service in Little Rock, Arkansas, and she received her Bachelor of Arts from Washington University in St. Louis in Environmental Studies and Architecture. So Maddie, take it away. Thank you.
Thank you for the introduction, Dina. And as Dina mentioned, my name's Maddie Salzman, and so yeah, well, this is part 3 in a 4-part webinar series that is within the Energy is Everywhere webinar that just goes through resident engagement strategies based on the season and trying to make it relevant to the time of year. So of course, things start to heat up now. We're focusing on summer. And Dina also mentioned that we'll have time for Q&A at the end, which is great. You'll also notice within the GoToWebinar, there's a chat box where you can feel free to pose any question to the organizers or to the group, and then that way I can take it at the end if questions come up while I'm talking. But yeah, so thank you all for joining us today. So the webinar itself, as Dina also mentioned, is based off of a toolkit created by Stewards for Affordable Housing for the Future. And this is a great toolkit that is offered for free, entirely online, and it's also in completely editable formats. So it's a really great resource to have available, and you can have access to this presentation after the webinar, and you'll be able to use that link on this slide to have access to all of the materials. And usually what I recommend to people is there's a folder at the top where you can zip the entire thing because it's a lot of documents, and I just save it on my desktop. So that way you can kind of explore through at your own pace. But the toolkit itself engages residents on energy use, water use, and general healthy living strategies. And for this webinar and for Energy is Everywhere, we focus specifically on the energy resources. But I do like to put a plug in there that there's plenty of resources to be used in this toolkit besides the one I mentioned here. But that being said, all of the documents and items and printouts that I reference in this presentation are available for free download, and that you can edit them as fits for your needs. So these are tips that I like to make sure I start off with every webinar, every presentation related to resident engagement strategies. So what I'm about to say sounds very obvious, I get that, but the big key to resident engagement is to be engaging and to find out what things really matter to your residents and are going to get them to show up. A lot of times successful strategies are based on finding what issue we care about or you might care about in terms of energy, and how does this relate to people's daily lives? How does this relate to things that already concern your residents so that they can become more interested in this new issue for them? So different ways to be engaging include everything from snacks and refreshments. I always say if somebody's deciding whether or not to come in the meeting, if there's even just like some drinks or some like finger food, that is great for getting people in the door. Having printed out materials, people like something they can hold on to and take from an event and look at later in case they forget something they learned. And in general, just be responsive to resident concerns. What are the things that they want to talk about? What are the things that they're interested to learn about related to these issues? And then in general, keep things fun and take advantage of events and holidays. So I'll go into that a little bit more later, but there's plenty of ways to try to incorporate these strategies into other things already happening. So seeing as the warm weather is approaching us, and I think for probably some of you on the line, it's well with us already. It's important to really think about what are cooling strategies we can employ that do not cost us a lot of money and do not end up using a lot of energy in order to utilize. So according to the Energy Information Administration, air conditioning accounts for about 6% of home energy use. And that doesn't sound like a lot, but I will say, and that's an average over the country. So in warmer parts of the country, if some of you guys maybe are further down south, it can be a much higher percentage than that. And for a lot of people, it can be what really pushes people over the edge in terms of electricity bills. It's not necessarily something people factor into their budgeting going into the summer. The summer is a time where people are thinking about going on vacation and things, and they might not be thinking just how much it's going to affect their electricity bill in the hotter months. And that adds up. So you can see Americans spend about $11 billion on air conditioning annually. So it's really something that if we're able to use strategies that save us energy, that also relates to saving us money as well. But aside from that, being too warm or too hot is a big source of discomfort for residents in general, and that can just be feeling uncomfortable in your house and you know, just wanting it to be cooler, to things that are much more dangerous, and excess heat can be associated to health risks and even death for people who are maybe older or infants and people who are not able to manage their body temperature as well. So of course it's something that we want to be keeping in mind, that you know, we want people to save energy, but we also fundamentally want them to stay cool. And kind of last but not least, but a lot of times cooling strategies are related to electricity blackouts throughout the summer. These are increasingly common in the area of the country I'm from, the Northeast, where everybody is trying to turn their air conditioner on all at the same time on those really hot days, and it ends up blacking out the electricity for everybody, which can then in turn be associated with a lot more health risks, because not only does your air conditioner not work, but neither do the fans. So in general, strategies that help reduce energy also help reduce risk of blackouts. So in general, I try to break down the items within the SAHAF toolkit into three major areas. So go from building knowledge to changing behavior to inspiring social change. Before anybody can be an advocate for reducing energy use or can really be super inspired about how they can, you know, impact this in their own lives, they need the knowledge base first. If we try to skip this step, people will be confused. They don't understand why it relates to them. They don't understand why it's important or why they should care. So because of the setup of the webinars, we try to do knowledge activities in June, behavior activities in July, and social change activities in August, just to make sure we're building that knowledge and also to keep it relatively easy for people to implement. There's not too many activities each month, and you can just focus on doing a couple of them really well each month. And the numbers, if you're not familiar with the toolkit, they say like Exhibit 4-17. That's just how you can find it within the toolkit itself, because they're all foldered and numbered that way, just make it easier. So in order to actually implement any strategies and to help your residents engage on this process, you need to have knowledge on how to stay cool. So we have a ton of things that can fit into this category that I like to point out. So first, in terms of resident behavior, stay hydrated. If you have been on some of my webinars earlier this year, you might recognize this one because this helps you stay warm in the winter and helps you stay cool in the summer. It's also just a safety issue. If somebody's getting overheated, staying hydrated is really key to keeping your body's ability to maintain temperature. You also would want to wear light, loose, thin clothing. It doesn't necessarily mean having, you know, strapless clothes or whatever. You can actually wear clothes that kind of cover your body. That doesn't necessarily make you hot, but as long as they're light and like a thin fabric and fairly loose fitting, that helps keep airflow and keep you feeling not overheated. Sounds obvious, but it helps to really be diligent about cooling rooms only when people or pets are in them. Don't just keep the air conditioner on all day. And one other thing similar to this is try to only turn the temperature knob little increments. So when you get home, a lot of people, they walk in the door and the house is hot, they want it to be cool, and they turn it all the way down to 60. And of course, that's going to really kick your system into overdrive and make it work a lot harder than it needs to. And then if you don't change it back, you'll be uncomfortably cold. So just try to change it in small increments to where you want the temperature to be. Another thing, take cold showers, air dry clothes, especially if you have your clothes dryer in the apartment building or in your house itself. That gives off heat, and it will make your air conditioner or fans or whatever need to work harder to keep cool. And cold showers, even if it's just a quick one, can really help stay cool even when the air is really warm. BYOSC, build your own swamp cooler, of course, is what that stands for. And so a swamp cooler is really just combining some evaporative cooling strategies in your house. So probably the easiest one to think of is if you have a fan and then you put a plate or a tray of cold water in front of the fan, and then that takes from not just blowing warm air out at you, but also cool air out at you, and that is really, it actually works very well. So this can even be a fun one to engage kids on, you know, teach people how to do this, and they'll be impressed with how it feels like an air conditioner, but it's just a fan. But in your home in general, you want to utilize fans rather than AC as much as possible. We'll go into kind of why that matters later. But a lot of times fans can help a lot, particularly if you're in a dry climate rather than a humid one. You want to set the thermostat at 74 to 78. If you're comfortable going warmer than that, the warmer you go, the more energy you're going to save. But there's really no reason to be down at 68 or 70 degrees when it's like 100 degrees outside. If you walk into a house that's at 70, even 78 on a 100-degree day, it feels very cool by comparison. You also want to use blinds and curtains to block sunlight during the day. You'll remember in the winter staying warm strategies, this was the opposite. Keep your blinds open when the sun's coming in. Now the sun's making us too hot, so we want to keep the blinds shut. And if possible, especially if you live in a dry area where it really does cool off quite a bit at night, a lot of times you can get away with turning off the AC at night and opening up windows, and that'll keep you really cool and save energy as well. From a maintenance perspective, these are things that not necessarily the residents are able to do themselves, but you can help be involved with and help educate people on. Clean or replace air filters, particularly in the air conditioning units. You want to seal off any areas where you might be losing cool air, so you want to make sure if the window frames let air in and out. You can kind of like feel a breeze sometimes. You want to close that off so you're not losing the cool air that you've taken energy to cool down out to the outside. And then this is not necessarily a thing people can do everywhere, but it would be useful to look into if your utility has a blackout prevention program. And there's little pieces of technology that utilities will sometimes offer or give a rebate for that will tell your air conditioner to turn off or to turn up a few degrees when the area is at risk for a blackout. And, you know, on the one hand, it might make at times the space you're cooling a little bit warmer, but these devices really work, and if the risk is that you have a blackout and all of the air conditioning stops, it ends up being a lot more comfortable for everybody involved. So it's definitely worth looking into seeing if a utility in your area has a blackout prevention program. So once you know these strategies, you are then able to teach them to your residents. So this is Exhibit 417, and it's just a printout to teach people about programmable thermostats. Now, if your residence area does not have programmable thermostats, this obviously will not work as well for you, but there might be some parts, like common areas, that have programmable thermostats that you can engage residents on. And this one applies to winter as well as summer, so you can leave this up year-round, which is kind of nice. The next one, 426, is general summer conservation tips. These go over a lot of the things that I mentioned 2 slides ago. And yeah, just something that you can hand out to residents, post on the wall, or have a little meeting about, or, you know, whatever way kind of is going to be best utilized by your residents. That's up to you. But this is just kind of an eye-catching way to engage residents on these issues. And then the last one, you'll notice this is very similar to an activity that you could do in the winter as well. So maybe if you've seen that webinar, it's just bringing somebody in, maybe from the utility, or if somebody in your office is particularly knowledgeable about thermostat setup, have residents sign up for an in-home tutorial on how to set their thermostats. A lot of times, you know, this is something people hear, but once it's set, it's set. So you don't need to worry about it a lot. And so maybe you helped show them how to set their thermostat in the winter, and of course we want it now on different settings for the summer, and so to help them through that process. And if, you know, maybe it'll take too much of somebody's time to really do it in everybody's home, you still might be able to have a common event in a common space where you can walk through the process and then you know, have it take a little bit less time if that's an issue for you. So for July, you want to focus on changing behavior, right? Those were just strategies for how to get the knowledge out there about what people should be doing. And then the strategy here is really to engage people in ways on how to make sure these strategies are doable and achievable. They're not just pie-in-the-sky ideas. It's something that people really feel like they can have ownership over. So some of these relate a little bit more to the things I was saying than others. Some of them are really good any time of the year, but are particularly good in the summer as well. So this next one is Exhibit 430. These are newsletter inserts. So if you do a printed newsletter, you can post it, you know, just in the corner. We've talked about this on some of the previous webinars, the conservation corner section, where you can provide any tips for conserving energy. And then, or if you have an email newsletter, you can also insert it that way as well. Any way that you outreach to residents. The next one is a different conservation corner. So the first one is about space cooling, and then this one's about laundry, washing in cold water. As I mentioned, these machines contribute to heating up your home unnecessarily. Waiting for full loads, and then also if it's possible to air dry where you are, that's also a great strategy as well. And then just in general, because air conditioning is almost always an electrical use, if you need to have the air conditioning on because it's just too hot and there's safety risks involved, then it's worth it to think of other ways to save on electricity so the bill isn't too overwhelming for people. So using a power strip, keeping computers shut down, turning off or unplugging TVs and stereos when they're not being used. These are all important ways to contribute to reducing electricity use all year round, but especially in the summer. This next one, Exhibit 433, is a door hanger. Similarly, just information about how to save energy through electricity, and what's nice is you can print this out and then just hang it on people's doors. Just another way to interact with residents. And I'd also recommend to not just like hang it on a door and walk away, but knock on the door if they're home, have a conversation, give it to them, tell them what it is, why you're posting it, and that just helps engage them even more in the process. And then this next one is Exhibit 515, and it's just an exercise or activity that you can do with residents, kind of exploring different energy uses of different electronics around the house. And it's just really helpful to kind of think about not only what is really impactful and what kind of is a smaller impact by comparison, but it helps you translate into cost what that comes out to. So obviously there's a lot of things on this list, but I think something that's really important to note is that a window fan and ceiling fan have kind of a watt. Watt is just a measure for electricity use, so a range from like 55 to 250, 65 to 175. But by comparison, you look at even the smallest window units are 500 watts. So the smallest air conditioning window unit is at least double the largest window fan in terms of energy use. So there's a lot of energy that can be saved just by using fans more than AC, at least as much as possible. And then all the way down at the bottom there, you can see the energy use related to clothes dryers and heaters. So if you're able to air dry clothes, you're not consuming energy that way, which is great, and you're also not contributing to heat in the house. And then if you're taking cold showers, that is huge for your water heater bill as well. All right, so then for August, really comes down to social change. And so the categories I tend to put in here, I try to do fewer activities that maybe take up more of people's time, bring communities together, can spark conversation, and really show people that learning about this stuff can be fun and not just kind of a drag on their day. So for August, the focus is on basically an energy bingo activity and then also a movie night. So I'll go into those a little bit. This is just a poster to go with the energy bingo activity. And the whole idea is it's a way for people to learn about energy use and get people engaged, and you can have prizes even if they're really small, or just the sheer excitement of winning maybe is prize enough. So there's, like I mentioned, there's this one, and then the next slide shows one of the very many sheets that comes along with this process. But inside of the toolkit, I didn't put them all in this presentation. You have everything you need. I think it's exhibits 516A through F. So everything is print ready, ready to go, and gives you rules to figure out how to run the game. And then finally, I think movie nights are a great way to engage kids on all of this stuff. There's movies like Ice Age: The Meltdown. There's also The Lorax. Fern Gully is an old favorite of mine, an old cartoon that talks about deforestation. But it's a great way to kind of engage kids on this stuff. Of course, who doesn't like movies? But and then they can also kind of share what they've learned with their parents. So don't underestimate the educational pathway that is from kids to adults, because parents listen to what their kids are learning in school or learning in various settings. So if you can engage them too, that's also great. So just in general, to reiterate some things I've said in this webinar already, and then also in previous webinars, you want to take advantage of the season. Since it's warm weather in the summer just about everywhere in the country, we're not focusing on how to stay warm or heating or a lot of other strategies that you could focus on at other points in the year, but we're trying to focus on things that are already relevant to your residents right now. And then there's also lots of potential events you can coordinate with. Coming up next week is the summer solstice, and the longest day of the year. A lot of people might know that the solstice is an event, but not really know why or how it's related to warmer weather, just the sun being out longer. So it can be a great way to kind of engage people through an event on what's happening. You can also have events at Independence Day, even if for the most part it's unrelated to energy. I'm not saying having like an energy-based Independence Day celebration, but just have your printouts ready and show people how to become more engaged in this process. And then the Olympics, it can also be a great way to get people together to talk about this stuff, maybe a pre-meeting or a post-meeting. And it sounds really simple, but if you're going to have a watch party or a place where people can congregate for these types of events, maybe a downstairs room or even a finished basement room is ideal, because it'll keep people cooler rather than on the top floor of a building if you can avoid it. Because as we all know, heat rises, and that won't help trying to keep cool. I'll say it again, find your resident leaders and the people who are interested in these issues. I bring this up every webinar. But there's going to be people who are really interested in this, and it might be because they're interested in saving money. They might be concerned about climate change and how they can use less energy. They might be interested in being more comfortable in their homes. It's hard to know exactly what will interest any one person, but keep them engaged and have them help you put on these events. So hanging up signs, letting residents know about events. These people are really able to engage the community in a way that it's impossible just as one person to do. And then in general, I always just like to remind people, don't take on more than you have time for. Opt to do a few simple activities well. So if you're going to take on energy bingo, maybe that means there isn't time for a big movie night event as well. And maybe there is, but it makes sense to focus your resources to plan a few activities that work really well. And I think within the toolkit itself, there's so many activities that are possible, it can be a little overwhelming. So it's great to just kind of start from a place of, what issues matter to you or to your residents, and do a couple at a time from there. So that's basically it. And I know it's a little shorter than the hour we have set out for the webinar, but if you have any questions, please feel free to write them in the chat box, and I'll be able to take them. Also, if anybody is interested to kind of explain if you've had any good activities or, things you'd like to share with other people on the line, that's also always great to hear as well.
Maddie, this is Dina. I have a question for you. In your experience, what were some best practices that you saw in your prior work when you were working in Missouri and Arkansas and even rural India on home energy? I mean, that might be really telling.
Yeah, ooh, that's a good question. Now I'm like trying to think how this stuff in India relates. I mean, honestly, the biggest thing I learned, really, I guess, in all of those places, is that, and it sounds very obvious, so I'm not trying to be basic with this information, but the things that motivate any one of us to be involved with these types of issues are not the same as for anybody else. And you know, I was working mostly with mothers in rural India, and they care a lot about the air quality inside of their house. And that was, you know, they didn't want to be burning fires inside of their house if they could avoid it, which makes sense because of that air quality perspective and the impact that has on their children and their own lungs, and, you know, they can feel that impact. Then, you know, going to some places, in some parts of the country, climate change is a huge motivating factor for people to get involved and to feel, you know, that by participating in these activities, they're having a larger impact outside of themselves and outside of their community. But then you go to other parts of the country, and that will not only not motivate people, but it will turn people away from what you're trying to do. And you know, maybe that's a separate conversation in some of these situations, but there's always ways to incorporate energy efficiency and just learning more about how energy works into your life, and it doesn't need to be, you know, from any one perspective. So I cannot emphasize enough utilizing the toolkit, surveys, and the different resources they have for how to engage residents in who, you know, may be coming from very different perspectives on these issues. And also, just frankly, so when I was living in rural India, it got up to about 120 degrees throughout the summer, and nobody had AC. So when I know I sound a little bit like I'm standing on my soapbox about the fans, but the fans are how I got through that time period.
Yeah, no, they actually mentioned it on NPR that I don't remember which city in India, but that it had reached 120 or 122 degrees.
Yeah, yeah, it gets extremely hot.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, you know, of course, like I never want to come off as if reducing, you know, it doesn't matter how overheated you feel, turn off the AC. Like, you know, the idea is for people to be comfortable and to not need to spend a ton of money to be comfortable. But if you are in situations where people do not have access to AC, not everybody in the U.S. has access to AC, let alone in India or wherever else. There are real ways to try to maintain as much comfort as possible, even in intense heat.
That makes sense.
Thanks, Dina. If anybody else has questions, feel free to put them in the chat box. Happy to chat about something else too. Or raise a hand. We can maybe turn off the mic. All right, well, of course, my contact information is provided at the end here. So if you have specific questions, either related to energy use in general or to using the toolkit, or, whatever else, feel free to send me an email. I'm always happy to talk about this stuff. And this webinar will be posted online on the SEED website where we put all the other webinars. So you can show it to somebody else, and you can also see the other presentations, not only for the previous resident engagement ones I've done, but also the general Energy is Everywhere webinars as well.
Thank you, Maddie, so much for doing this webinar for us. And everybody on the line, stay tuned for the next webinar. We will be sending the announcement in the next week or so. So thank you again for participating, and we'll see you next time. Bye-bye.
Bye.